Good morning. My name is Jay Williams. I have the privilege of being the president and CEO of the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving, and we are so excited to have you out this morning. I have said this many times, but I'll still say it because it was something that I want to make sure I never take for granted. The fact that we are, again, gathering in person and able to connect with one another after we all went through a pandemic that was far too long and separated us and turned our worlds upside down and resulted in the loss of life and sickness, and it impacted us in ways that I know I would have never imagined. So I never want to take for granted the opportunity that we have to engage with you in person around the philanthropy in the greater Hartford region. So first of all, it's just so good to see you all, and I love coming here to the Pond House. I also want to thank you all for those of you who have decided to leave a legacy gift to the Hartford Foundation, for those of you who are considering leaving a legacy gift to the Hartford Foundation. We don't take for granted the confidence that you put in our organization to carry out your charitable wishes. Without you, we would not exist. Without you, we would not have the resources to do the things that are important to improving the quality of life in the greater Hartford region. So on behalf of the board, on behalf of the staff and I, who I have the privilege of working with on a regular basis, we are just so excited about our speaker. Before I introduce Sue Dana, who will introduce Susan Turnbull, I just want to highlight the fact that we are 18 months away from our centennial anniversary. 100 years in 2025, we will celebrate our 100th anniversary. And we are so excited about the prospect. We are in the very, very early planning stages, but you can rest assured it will be centered on our commitment to this community. It will be centered on the generosity of our donors. It will, yes, reflect on the previous 100 years, but perhaps more importantly and more excitedly, it will talk about how we plan. Now, when I say we, as an organization, because unless technology, which it could, advances very quickly, it is likely that we won't be here physically in 100 years, but certainly the Hartford Foundation of Public Giving will be. So to that end, stay tuned for more information around our centennial, how U.S. donors hopefully will be inspired and excited to join, and how we will continue to draw inspiration from all of you. So again, thank you for being here. I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Sue Dana, who will introduce our fabulous keynote speaker.
Thank you, Jay. It's a pleasure for me to introduce Susan Turnbull as our keynote speaker to talk about the enduring impact of an ethical will. Susan is the founder and principal of Personal Legacy Advisors. She's a professional writer, speaker, and workshop facilitator, and the author of The Wealth of Your Life, a step-by-step guide for creating your ethical will. Her work has been featured in many national publications, including the New York Times and USA Today. She's a member of the Purposeful Planning Institute, the Boston County Estate Planning Council, and the Personal Historian Network Northeast. She's a graduate of Colby College, and she and her husband live in Manchester by the Sea in Massachusetts. So please join me in welcoming Susan Turnbull.
Thank you so much, Sue. Is my mic on? Sound good now? Thank you so much for coming this morning, for coming out for breakfast, for coming to this incredibly beautiful place. Gosh, you're lucky to have this as a resource in your backyard. So it's also really an honor for me to be here as part of the way that the Hartford Foundation is thanking you for your extraordinary loyalty to the city and your extraordinary loyalty to the foundation. And you are, the steps that you have taken in your generosity to the foundation will be part of your legacy, are part of your legacy. And legacy is what is the backdrop to what I'm going to be talking about this morning. But I think that legacy is kind of a hard word, because what does it actually mean? It's so associated, especially in the realms of estate planning, financial planning, estate planning, it's so associated with money and with death, right? If someone goes to an attorney because they want to do an estate plan, a legacy plan, what are they talking about? They're talking about the distribution of their assets after they've died. If you hear that someone has left a legacy, quote unquote, what do you assume about them right off the bat? You probably assume that they're dead, right? Because we usually talk about people's legacy after they've died. You probably assume that they're either very wealthy or very exceptional in something. And there's also this kind of existential shroud around the idea of legacy, the term legacy, I think. It's like it's the last and most important thing on your life's to-do list. You're supposed to have left a legacy. Well, I can't even make it through my daily to-do list, and now you tell me that I'm supposed to leave a legacy on top of that? I mean, good grief. And there's also, the word legacy really is also associated very much with family, with heirs and with descendants. And I had an experience a few years ago where I realized how painful that association of legacy can be. I was traveling, I was on a plane, I was coming back home from a presentation, and in the last 15 minutes or so, I struck up a conversation with the guy that was sitting next to me. And I asked him what he did and why he was on the plane coming back to Boston, and he told me that he was talking about his work, which was highly technical, and I was doing my best to keep up and pretend I knew what he was talking about. And then right before we were to get up to leave, he asked me what I did. And I said something about the presentation that I had given and that one of the themes was legacy. And by this time he had stood up. And he mumbled something that sounded like, and I know this is what he said, it wasn't just this is what he said. He said something about the fact that his son had just died and that he was not going to have a legacy. And then he got up and was lost in the stream of people that were going out of the plane, leaving me kind of sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, you know. That obviously I brought up something that was extremely painful for him. So the idea of legacy is something that has a lot of associations with it, some of which are positive and others of which can be kind of hard. And so what I want to do today is I want to broaden the definition of legacy, have you leave those kind of negative associations behind, and think about legacy like this, that your legacy is your influence, essentially the difference that you make in the lives of other people. And this is the frame that I want to use today for my remarks. So we're going to talk a little bit about this idea of legacy. We're going to swim around in it a little bit. I got a couple of exercises for you to help you think about this, because I want this to be fun and interactive this morning. We're then going to take a deep dive into a particular instrument of legacy called the ethical will. So when you think about legacy as influence, you realize that it really doesn't have much to do with death at all, because you're making a difference, having an influence in the lives of people all the time. It's very much in the present. And in many ways, the way you're influencing people with your character, with your example, with how you make people feel, with the problems that you solve, with everything you're doing in your life, though the way that you have influence upon other people is oftentimes a mystery. I mean, has anyone ever said to you, I never forgot the time you told me such and such, or you did such and such, and for the life of you, you can't remember that? And so it can be a mystery. We don't really know the kind of impact that we're having in the lives of other people on a day-to-day basis. And it's also something that, if you think about it this way, that legacy influence can be positive, but it can also be negative. You know, hurtful words or hurtful actions, even if unintentional, can cast a long shadow in the lives of other people. And it also is something that you don't necessarily go around all the time, all the day, thinking, what's my legacy going to be? But there are times in your life, whether by age or by circumstances, that you really do think about it. And my guess is that all of you in the room think about it, have thought about it, and have asked yourself, how can I be an enduring positive influence during my life and afterwards? And by taking the step that you have, or you're thinking about doing, in terms of supporting the foundation for years and years into the future, that's what you've done. You're going to be creating an enduring influence in the present and in the future. But that gift that you made, that decision that you made to the foundation is really just the tip of the iceberg. And it doesn't really reveal everything that's underneath the surface, that's behind your decision to support the foundation to the degree that you have. That universe that's under the water, that's the bulk of the iceberg of your life experiences and your values and your commitment and your effort and your work, that doesn't necessarily show, but it's there in your decision to give, and I really applaud you for all of that. So the other thing that's underneath the surface there of your decision to give is the influence of other people upon you. And this is another really interesting, I think, dimension of the idea of legacy as influence. And that is that you are both a creator of influence, a creator of legacy in many, many ways, but you're also a carrier of the legacy of other people. And the first exercise we're going to do is going to give you an opportunity to really think about that and play with that. So on your table, you've got a couple handouts. And I want you to pull up this one, which is called Dimensions of Legacy. And what I want you to do is to think of one or two, no more than 3 people who've been significant in your life, in some way have left their mark on you. And this could be a parent or a grandparent who loved you to bits and helped you believe in yourself. It could be a colleague or a friend that mentored you. It could be someone who did you wrong and changed your life. That boyfriend, who dropped you, or the boss that said you weren't good enough, changed your life. It could be someone whose example you looked at and said, I don't want to be like that person. And it doesn't have to be the most influential people in your lives. When I do this exercise, I like to think about my friend Rebecca, whose personal style I really liked and sort of emulated. She left a mark on me. So don't overthink this. There could be lots of names up there, and this could be a person who's alive or not. So just take just a minute or so and write down a couple of names there above the line. Oh, by the way, put your name in the middle, by the way. Put your name and your, or your initials in the middle there. And once you have the names down, the name or names down, can you think of a word, a value, a trait, a descriptive word that you would use that you associate with that person? And next, I want you to bring one of those people into the room now. What I'd like you to do is to pair up. Find someone that's next to you. And because what I want you to do is follow this prompt here, which is to share a memory of a person who had an impact on you. And you're each, it's going to be about we're going to take about 5 minutes. You're each going to get about 2.5 minutes. So to your listening partner, could you please tell your listening partner who this person is and how you know them? And by the way, if the person that's sitting next to you is your spouse, it would be a good idea to switch chairs. And you can always switch back. Always switch, but you may think your spouse isn't interested in this story anyway. And so if you could please switch up, that would be great. And so you want to tell your listening partner who they are, how you know them, and why did you pick that word? Tell a story about that person, bring that person into the room, and why you chose that word. Okay, so I'm going to give you 5 minutes. Well, it sounds like that was kind of fun. I always like to watch people's facial expressions and their laughter and their smiles. Okay, time to move on. I'm so glad that was successful. I just saw a very nice exchange over here. People shook hands, say thank you for listening. And so does anyone want to share anything about that experience? Anything that they learned about themselves or learned from the person who they were speaking to? Anyone brave enough to want to speak up about what that experience, any surprise you got from that experience? Something you learned you didn't expect? Okay. Wait a sec, here's a mic, wait a second.
I'm not going to give away anything confidential here, but I was struck by the extent to which this person influenced Mary Jane at such a young age, and how vivid that memory was, and how much it seems to have shaped your trajectory from there, right? So it's just, what was it? You were 5 or 5th grade, sorry, when she saw this person in a driveway, and that moment sort of turned into
Wow.
a life driver.
Well, and may I ask Mary Jane whether you had already realized that? I mean, was this something that you were very conscious of, the influence of that person, or did this exercise trigger that realization?
It probably brought her, in some respects, brought her up the list. But it was a woman in my community where I grew up who was so unlike everyone else. And I was standing with my best friend in her driveway, and I thought, that's what I want to be. And so my whole life, I wanted to be older. I have, wanted to mean something in this life, and it's all because of Emmy Kavod and the conversation we had in her driveway when I was in the 5th grade.
Wow. That's a very cool story.
His story's wonderful, though.
Oh.
Yeah. Who's influenced this guy is his daughter, which is incredibly touching.
Yes.
And the realization that when she was born and in those early stages that he needed, I'm going to put words in your mouth, he needed to be a bigger, better person for her. It's pretty cool.
Yes. Thank you so much, you two, for sharing that. Really nice. So the reason I like to do this exercise is just to remind you that legacy is really personal, and that it's not out there in the sky someplace out there in the future. It's very personal, and it's very much a part of what's in your heart and what's in your memory, what's in your mind. It's all about the people, the experiences, the values that are most important to you. So that's a stage I like to set when I'm talking about the whole idea of legacy. And there's just one other lens that I want to look through before we get into ethical wills. There's another way that I want to help you think about legacy, and that is especially in relation to how you spend your money and how you use your money, both philanthropically and in other ways in your life. And that is that there's a really, really simple question that gets at the difference between tangible, or not the difference, but the relationship between tangible wealth and intangible wealth. Tangible legacy, intangible legacy. And this is the question. What is it that you possess, that you have, that you can give? In the largest sense of the word. And then a corollary to that, related but not the exact same question, is what do you hope that other people will ultimately receive from you? And in the context of estate, financial, and philanthropic planning, the question of what do you have to give, if an advisor was to ask you that, you'd say, well, I have money to give. I have money to spend on what's important to me. I have money to give away to the things that are important to me. And after I'm no longer here, I'm hoping I'll have some money to pass on, either philanthropically or to my family members or those in my closest circle. And that's oftentimes where the conversation stops, the whole question of what do you ultimately have to give. But if you were to ask yourself, well, is that all I have that I hope other people are going to receive from me? Most people would say, well, Lord, no. There's so many other things that I hope other people are going to be receiving from me. Certainly in your closest circle, there's love and support and attachment to relationships and attachment to values and stories and a heritage. Most people feel as though they have a certain amount of information and knowledge and wisdom and life lessons that they would hope that they would have the opportunity for other people to pick up in some way. Those things are valuable to them, and they hope that other people will understand and pick them up in some way. And some of the things that are most important for other people to receive from you is clarity. Clarity of your intentions, of your estate plan, clarity of the intentions of your giving, clarity of your feelings. So when the time comes and you are no longer here, there's not a lot of muddiness left, that you've been as clear as you can be about how you feel about the people that are closest to you and what your intentions are with your planning. And so that kind of clarity of intent is a fantastic gift that you can give to your loved ones, and that you can give to the foundation as well, as you're helping them understand what it is that you want your gift to achieve. So, and when you're alive, your time is the greatest gift that you have to give. To share your ideas and your expertise and your energy, to be able to provide opportunities and experiences for those in your closest circle, as well as for people that your giving is aimed for. So I like to, this another way I like to think about legacy is that a legacy is a gift, essentially. It's the influence of all that you are and all that you give in the very largest sense of the word. So this is just another eye-opening question that or point of view, I think, to help you think about the decisions that you're making with your money, both your philanthropic dollars and what I would call your personal dollars. There's another, we're not going to do this exercise today, but I left you with this because I think that this is just, a very simple way for you to think about, the money that you have to give that's on the left, and then, what do you want others to receive from you in sort of an intangible sense? And I think for you to be able to think about, both with your philanthropic dollars, what are you ultimately giving with your philanthropic dollars? What is it that you ultimately want to give? Is it opportunity? Is it experiences? Is it beauty? Is it support? You're giving the dollars, but why are you doing it? What are they for? What is it that you're actually giving? And then in thinking in terms of your closest circles, your family members, however you define your most intimate circles, what do you want them to get from you in an intangible sense? And so it's helpful to look at that and say, well, yes, there's a lot that I want them to get from me. Probably for a lot of you, you can relate to those. How can you make that personal? What would you put on the right side that you hope that your loved ones and those recipients of your philanthropic dollars, what do you ultimately hope that you're giving to them? So another way, this is I hope, an imagination opening exercise for you to do when you go home. So we're going to pivot now to ethical wills because the relevance of ethical wills to this whole conversation is that it is a mistake to assume that everything that you want people to get from you, they're going to automatically get from you. It's a mistake for you to assume that they already know these things. And an ethical will is an instrument where you can document some of what's on the right side. And you may ask yourself, okay, what is an ethical will? I've never heard of this. What is it? And this is what an ethical will is. It's essentially an instrument of legacy, but it is what it is. First of all, it's an instrument for intentional communication that's going to ultimately live beyond you, even though you might share this ethical will, which is customarily a letter, although it can also be some kind of a recording if you chose to do that. It's a non-binding instrument, document or recording. It's directed to loved ones, trustees, or successors. And its purpose is to share information or reflections that are deemed too important to go undocumented or be lost over time. So I learned first about ethical wills about 20 years ago. Now, I'd never heard of them before. I was working as a freelance journalist. People were telling me, I was working for newspapers, people were telling me amazing stories and sharing oftentimes quite profound stories and reflections. And I oftentimes would wonder, who else knows these? And has this been documented anywhere? And I always thought you had to write an autobiography to be able to document some of the stories of your life, your reflections, and so forth. And when I understood that out of the Jewish tradition, starting about 1,000 years ago, there was this thing called an ethical will, which was a letter that was written with the intention of transmitting what was most essential for your loved ones to hear from you. When I read about that, I thought, oh, well, you don't need to write an autobiography. You can actually capture a certain amount of information and essential pieces of information in a letter. Anyone can write a letter. And especially now, people don't throw letters away. They're especially precious now. And so I thought, okay, this is beautiful. Anyone can do this. And this is, by the way, having just done my estate plan again at that point for the second or third time, I have the satisfaction of checking it off the list. Thank God that's done. But it didn't have any personality. You know, they don't have any personality. They have no voice. They have no warmth. I thought, okay, well, this is the opportunity to have a side document to a legal will. This is actually the missing piece of estate planning. So I was off and running. I was really fired up by this idea that I thought that everybody ought to know. Starchy as the term ethical will is, and it is starchy. It is. In the Jewish tradition, what it was that it was the opportunity for fathers to write to their sons sort of a letter of kind of a treatise of what it would mean to live a worthy or ethical life. And that's the derivation of the term ethical will. And it has such an interesting history that I didn't want to drop the history, but I always have to explain what it is. It's really a love letter, is what it is. Anyway, I was off and running, was really fired up and thought, I have the skills to be able to help people write these. And so that's what I did, hung up a shingle and began to ghostwrite these, wrote a lot of them. Then I wrote a guidebook, then I started giving presentations, and here I am almost 20 years later in the beautiful Pond House speaking to you. So I do want to give you this is an excerpt from a letter that is just about 1,000 years old. This man writes about money. There's an olden proverb, go to bed without supper and rise without debt. Defile not the honor of thy countenance by borrowing. May thy Creator save thee from that habit. So this man's telling his son, don't go out to dinner. Don't overdo your credit cards. And you know, we can still hear his voice, even though this is very old language. We can still hear sort of his a sense of responsibility. That the most valuable thing he can actually give his son is not money, but it's values, and it's his life lessons and his understanding about what it means to be a good man and live a worthy life. And I thought that was just a very beautiful idea. That kind of that active intentionality of transmitting what's most important to you. To the people you care most about. So what I want to do now is the best way for you to understand what a contemporary ethical will sounds like is to have you hear some excerpts. And I have 6 different excerpts here that various people have volunteered to read. And I'll talk about each one because each one has a little bit of a story attached to it. So I want to thank you in advance for those people that have volunteered to read.
1. I want you to understand why I created this charitable remainder Unitrust. It seemed the best way to both maintain my financial security and make a significant gift to cancer research in honor of my mother. It would sadden me greatly if somehow you felt I was creating the trust because I valued charity more than you. Please remember that love can't and shouldn't be measured by money or the size of your inheritance.
So this letter was written by a woman who wanted to explain her estate plan to her children. And she wanted the letter to be an introduction to a conversation that she would then have with them. So they got the common information, how the estate plan was functioning, how she'd set things up, and why she had done it. And she wanted especially and then she was going to, they were going to read, the intention was they were going to read the letter and then sit down and have a conversation about it. And so this was one of the things that she felt most important was, for her to express to her children, really the reason why she set this up. And it was an opportunity for her also to share some stories about her mother and the struggle that she had gone through with her mother. She told me that in the conversation that she had afterwards with her kids, that opened up a beautiful conversation that she was able to have with her kids they probably wouldn't have otherwise had, touching all kinds of subjects, including stories about her mother and why philanthropy was such an important value for her. So this is one of the main reasons why, or one of the primary motivators for people to create an ethical will is actually as a side letter to accompany a legal will and give context to to the gifts, to talk about where the money came from, what are the values behind the money, what are the decisions behind the estate plan, why did I make them? So that's one reason why people like to write these. That's a motivator for some people. So next example, please.
What I ultimately want to pass on to you is far greater than financial advantage, but a deep appreciation of the collective history and values you carry in your bones. This is your true wealth.
So this was written by a guy who was in his late 40s. And he had sold his business. He'd done fabulously well. He'd sold his business and he'd set up a dynasty trust, which meant that he was going to have a lot of descendants who were going to be receiving money from him at a certain point in time in the future. And a lot of those descendants, he hoped, would be so far in the future that they actually would never have even known him. That was his hope, that the money was going to last that long. And that idea kind of unsettled him, actually, as a self-made man. And what he wanted to do was to create a letter that each of the recipients would receive at the time of the first distribution that talked about, where he had a chance to share his own history and the history of his business. And he especially wanted to talk about his parents and grandparents, who would have been, of course, the common ancestors of his descendants. He credited those parents, grandparents. One set came from Germany, the other came from China. And he credited them and their values with what drove him and inspired him to build his business. And he really wanted them to know those histories and to have an appreciation for that, as well as an appreciation for where the money came from. He also wanted to share his own values about money and what he felt like money could and couldn't buy, and had a chance to express what he hoped the money would enable in their lives. So that's another example of a use of these letters. Next example.
You need to kick off the sheets. Busy is good. No one has a lock on a way to do something. There is a value somewhere in everyone. A joke is almost always in order.
Okay, so wanting to share some of your life lessons is another real motivator for people. A chance to sort of reflect back on their lives and say, well, what have I learned? And what is it that what life lessons would I like to be able to set down in ways that might be helpful to somebody else? And one of my favorite ways to have people do this is to write a bullet list. Because I think a lot of people kind of get stuck in thinking, oh, if I'm going to pass on wisdom and life lessons, it better be profound and well thought out, and I'm not profound, and so I'm not going to do this. Because I don't know what I would say, and I don't know how I would say it. And I think a bullet list, which you can write pretty quickly, if you were to sit down and say, what are 15 things that I know to be true, that my life has taught me, you'd get those 15 things and keep going. And this was actually in a workshop where that was the exercise. Write down 15 things you know to be true, your life has taught you, and this is 5 of that list of 15. And what I love about this is that it is so punchy, it is so short, it tells you so much about the character of this man. And he was so excited when he did this that he said, I'm going to go share this right away with my children and my grandchildren. And I'm probably going to add to it, too, because I have a lot more things that I might say. I was giving a workshop a couple weeks ago to a small group, and it was actually a private gathering. There were 10 couples. And there was a guy that came in. He was skeptical from the beginning about this. Why am I here? What is this about? And everything about his body language was like, I don't know if I want to be here. And so we were doing some exercises, and one of them was I wanted them to, I suggested that they could write down, a bullet list of things they knew to be true. And his body language changed utterly when he realized that what he could do was make a bullet list of his favorite music, his favorite songs. And that's the thing that he felt as though reflected him the most. And he was going to tell a story about each one of those songs. And so I thought that was just, well, first of all, it was beautiful to see him transition from skepticism to aha. But this is another really beautiful use of a bullet list. And someone else I know made a list of their favorite movies. Watch these movies and you'll understand me. You'll understand the times I grew up in, and you'll understand me. So I have another example of lessons learned. Who's my 4th reader?
My 9th grade science teacher introduced me to the idea of ebbs and flows. He drew diagrams of cycles on the board showing naturally occurring ups and downs. I see this in all areas of life, in biology, in business, in friendships, in marriages, and in society. Everything has its ebbs and flows, and sometimes when things are not quite how I would like them to be, it is reassuring to remember that idea is not jump in and try to force things to change.
Thank you. So this is an example of wisdom passed on, life lessons passed on in a narrative form. And this man traveled a lot. His kids were young at the time, and this was written in 2008. He traveled a lot. His kids were young. He was always afraid the plane would go down. And he wanted to leave something for his kids and for his wife in case that happened. And so he had a whole list of sort of themes, and each one of the themes he had a couple of paragraphs underneath, all oriented towards some of the things that he learned. And if he did live, which he did, it was his intention to share this with his kids when they were in their early 20s. And what I love about this example, this is a really hard driving guy. And what I like about this example is that the exercise of doing this reminded him that he also has to remember this, that sometimes there's a lot of flow, but sometimes there are ebbs too. And I need to remember this myself, that this is an attitude that I need to bring. So this man came to me 6 months ago, and he said, I really want to update my letter. Will you help me update this letter? And at the time that he wrote this letter in 2008, things were in flow. He was incredibly busy, and he had many businesses that he'd started and sold. Life was really good. And when he called me 6 months ago, he said, a whole lot has happened since then, and I really want to share what I've learned since then. Or am I mic'd again? Okay. I really want to share with my kids what I've learned since then. And he shared with me that one of his children had died in the intervening years. The business that he built, that he was so proud of and excited in 2008, he'd essentially been pushed out of. Am I out again? Anyway, he'd gone through, obviously, a real ebb there. And he's now on the other side, and he said that the thing that actually was fundamental in his coming out of this really low period in his life was that he oh my gosh, time to dance. Was that he said, I went back and read that letter that I wrote in 2008, and he said, I realized that's who I am. That's what I believe in. That's who I am. And he applied all those lessons that he'd written for his kids to himself. And he said, I thought I wrote this letter for my kids. I realized I actually wrote it for myself. So I thought that was an amazingly beautiful story. Next example. Well, I'll go ahead and read it then. Okay. This is, I want you to know something about my father, in whose name I set up this scholarship. This is pretty obvious what this person did. So this is a woman who didn't have any children, and she wanted to set up a scholarship fund in memory of her father, because it was her father that had inspired her. Her father had been in business, had inspired her to go to business school, and then go into business. She credited her father with her success. And so she set up this scholarship fund for high school students who wanted to study business. And she wanted them all to get a letter from her that explained why it is that she set this up, what she hoped the money would enable in their lives, and to tell the story about her father. And that is a very beautiful, I think for anyone who set up a scholarship fund, to think about doing that, to be able to communicate directly with your recipients. Okay, this last example.
I hope I will live for a very long time to see you well into adulthood and share your future with you. There's much to look forward to, and I hope I will be part of all the adventures and challenges and joys. But when the time comes, the most important thing you need to know is how much my love for you created the person that you will remember as me. I made you quite literally in my womb, but you made me too.
This is an excerpt of a half-page ethical will that a woman wrote to her kids. And this is what I think speaks to what's a primary motivator for a lot of people, is to use this letter to be able to say thank you, I love you, I bless you, those kind of emotional messages that you would want your loved ones to have from you always, and be able to go back to be in your presence again through the words that you put down on a piece of paper. And this is a beautiful example of how much you can say in a very, very short period of time, very short length of time. So to just sort of review, and I want to make sure that I get all your questions answered about what these are. As I said, they are customarily letters, but they can also be recordings. They are generally, but if you do a recording, it's a good idea to have a transcript made, because the darn machines might not be able to access that thing, that floppy disk that you made 15 or 20 years ago. And if these are going to be enduring, then you really should also have a transcript, so that, because I hope paper is never going to go out of style. Ethical wills can range anywhere from a paragraph to 20 or 30 pages, but that's a long letter, because these are letters. People only have a certain tolerance for what they think that a letter should be. So, and they are written customarily to family members, but they can be written to trustees. They can be as letters of wishes to trustees for those people that are taking over your trust. They can be written to successors, anyone that's taking over a philanthropic instrument. And they're customarily written to a named audience. So it's not usually to the world at large. They're usually to a named audience. And they can be a single letter, or they could be a combination of letters. There could be kind of a theme and variations. It was to a group of people where people got a common message, and then there were individual messages to individual people. And they're completely unique. I hope I've given you a sense of how different they are and how much they're very much a unique reflection of their authors. And people can share them, can choose to only share them after they've passed away, or they can share them during life. And I think they can be really powerful when they're shared during life, to start a conversation, to go from a monologue essentially to a dialogue, and for you to think of them as a work in progress, not to think, I have to know exactly what I'm going to say, I have to be as wise as I'm ever going to be, I have to know exactly what I'm going to say before I do these. If that was a place you had to be before you wrote one of these, you'd probably never do it, because most people think that maybe next week they'll finally get their act together. And so it's important to think about these as works in progress, and that your audience is also a work in progress, and to know that you can add or change these at any time. So this is just a last excerpt that I wanted to read to you, which was, this woman said, I say these things not because you have to follow them, but because I want you to know how I feel and how I see the world. The old ethical wills were very controlling, rule from beyond the grave, do this because I told you to do this. That's not a contemporary ethical will. A contemporary ethical will is a gift. It's a gift of yourself. And for the people who are going to read it, whenever they're going to read it, and however long it's going to stay in your family papers, or stay in the archives of the foundation, or with the trust documents, it's an opportunity for them to, who's ever reading them, to hear your voice again and take in what you said, however they're going to. And you're not in control of that. It is a gift of yourself for people to take as they will. And I love how that's stated. So you're probably thinking, okay, I think this is a good idea. And I think I'd like to do this. I'm guessing that I'm hoping a lot of you are thinking this is something that you would really consider doing. But then the minute you sit down, you go home, you begin to think about it, I'm going to predict there are going to be voices that come in your head. They're going to say, well, it sounded really good when Susan was there, but I think I better wait until I'm a little bit older, because I'm not really sure that I know what to say. I don't feel like I'm really old enough or wise enough yet. I'm not sure that I'm really a good writer, so I don't know if this is really for me. And it would need to be profound, and I don't really think that I'm very profound. It'd probably take time that I'm not sure that I really have. And besides, they already know everything anyway. And I certainly wouldn't want to lecture them. And I guess it actually means I'm going to die one day. Oh, I'm not going to do this. Or I'm going to do this later, which is an incredibly, incredibly common reaction. So I just want to warn you that you might have those voices in your head. So I just want to ask you if there are things that, or if there are questions that you wished you could ask people who are no longer here. How many of you have that experience? Can you raise your hand of questions you wish that you don't have answers to, that you wish you did because you didn't ask? You didn't ask, or they told you and you forgot, or they assumed you weren't interested, or they assumed you already knew. And so you can't assume that everything that you want your loved ones to know from you and understand from you, you can't assume that they know it, or that they'll remember it the way you want them to hear it from you. And so put yourself in the position of a potential recipient. Because I'm sure any potential recipient would not want you to make the choice that they wouldn't be interested, wouldn't want you to decide you weren't profound enough, wouldn't want you to assume that you didn't want them to know. So put yourself in the role of a recipient and sit down and begin to write something, and knowing that you can always add to it or change it if you want to. And so what I want to do is just show you just 3 different kind of structures you can follow for writing something that's a pretty tight letter. It's really important for you to think about your focus, what you want your focus to be. And I'm going to give you 3 different possible focuses, just to sort of get your imagination about making, because I want you to see that this could be possible for you to do. And each one of these has just 3 different areas to focus on. If you wanted to write a letter for your loved ones, for those in your most intimate circle, if you just expressed your gratitude, shared a little bit of wisdom in a bullet list, maybe just 3 bullets, and then blessed them, shared with you what your hopes were for them, and thought about what's the one most important thing you want to say to them, you could write something that was a page or 2, no more than that. That was an opportunity for you to express gratitude, wisdom, and blessing. And you'd have something timeless and beautiful. Maybe you want to be able to create a letter that goes along, that provides context to your estate plan. So let's share the story behind the money. Where did it come from? What are the reasons they exist? And then to express your values. What have you learned about money? What is your definition of success? And then to bless them. Again, bless them. What are your hopes for them? What do you hope the money might enable in their lives? Again, you could create not a very long letter here pretty quickly if you knew what your focus was and you decided what you wanted to do was to create context to the estate plan. Doesn't mean you couldn't also add a message of love as well to that, but I'm just trying to provide for you some structure. The third one is if you wanted to create something that was related to your philanthropy. So talk about why you did it. What motivated you to establish this gift? Whether or not you leave this with the foundation or you write this for your family members or some kind of a combination. Why did you do it? And what values are reflected in that decision? Where did those values come from? And then and share your hopes. What's your vision for a healthy impact upon the recipients of your giving? What's your hope for the impact of your action on your family? Of the example, how do you hope your family is going to be impacted by your decision to do this? So those are, I'm hoping there that you can see that if you pick a focus and you don't try to do too much, you can create something pretty easily. Now, I did create a guidebook, 2 guidebooks actually, which is, gives you the opportunity to really help you define your focus. That's what's on the left, and then what's on the right is across generations, and that's a guidebook for creating an expression of donor intent, very specifically about donor intent. These are displayed on the table outside if you want to take a look at them, and there are order forms there if you want to be able to purchase one today. No pressure. You can get them on the website as well. And if you do purchase one here today, just leave your name and address and I'll mail it to you. I don't have enough to give out today, but I'll mail it to you and the shipping is free. So you might want to take a look at one or both of those guidebooks. So we're almost close to finishing up, and we're going to just go to the second half of the exercise that you started off with today. And I'm sure you're probably guessing that maybe you knew you were going to go back to the bottom half of this, which is to really think about the future. And in whose life you hope that you will be making a positive influence. And by the future, I mean from the present moment, which is the moment right now, into the future, the near future, the far, far future, the future when you're no longer here, perhaps. Who is it, in either a general way or a specific way, whose lives are you hoping you're making a positive difference? Now, there could be dozens and dozens of names that you would want to put down there, and you can certainly add to this when you go home. But can you just write down a few, the names of people, either groups of people or individual names that you would put down first there on the chart? And as part of this, you might want to consider, again, we're talking about, you know, the gift, the intangible gifts. You might want to consider, well, what are the things that you hope that you are going to be able to, or that you will be able to, that you want to be able, that you want them to receive, excuse me. So that's another kind of a lens to lay on this, is what is it you hope that they will be receiving from you, both tangibly and intangibly. And if one of those people or group of people are an audience you'd like to write an ethical will to, then circle that name, circle those names. And then the last part of the exercise is I want you now, remember how you wrote down some adjectives, an adjective to describe one of the people who's been influential in your life? I want you now to think about yourself. What are 3 adjectives, up to 3 adjectives, that you'd like other people to use when they think of you, either during your life or afterwards? And this is aspirational. What you hope words they'll use to describe you. So in wrapping up here, I thank you for being a great audience. I hope I've expanded your imagination about both the ideas of legacy, the concept of legacy, and the idea of an ethical will, legacy letter, whatever you want to call it. And is it vain, do you think, to want to think about your legacy? I mean, I'm going to answer my own question and say no. And I see someone shaking their head also. No, it's not vain. We're actually really wired to do it. It's what grown-ups do. And it's actually what, you know, preserves the species, right? If we didn't pass on what we knew what was important, where would we be? You know, if we've been doing this since the age of the cavemen and passing on information about where the best hunting grounds were. It's what people do. And I hope I've proven today that legacy is not something that's out there far off in the future. It exists right now, all the time. And at any given time, you're both a creator and a carrier of legacy. But it's a mystery. We really do not know the ways in which we're ultimately going to be influential. But we know that it's not vague. We know that it's not distant. And I hope I've made the point that it's important to think about. It is a very wise and profound point of view to think about in what ways you hope that you will be making a difference. But there's a paradox at the heart of legacy. And that is that it's important to think about, it's important to be intentional about, but at the same time, the paradox is you're not in control of it. And the people that are in control of it are the people who are either voluntarily or involuntarily picking up pieces of you and taking them inside themselves. The people who are under the line in the chart that you just completed. Those are the people who are actually realizing your legacy. They're the ones that are in charge of it, and you are not in control of that. So I think that that's really humbling to realize that, but it also takes the pressure off a little bit. And what it means is that you need to live in awareness of the potency of the person that you are, the potency of your character, the potency of what you do, the potency of what you say and write. And to live in awareness of that potency, the potency of your money, the potency of your giving, the potency of the difference that you have the capacity to make, and to live in full awareness of that. And then in humility, go forward without the need to obsess about it or control it, and to just live the best life that you can, be the best person that you can be. So with that, I close, and thank you very much. So I'm happy to answer any questions or take any comments. Okay. Oh, there's a question here.
Just a comment to validate all that you've said, because I had parents who made an ethical will some 25 years ago, I bet. And it was in the context of a family meeting with their financial advisor that they produced their letter of their ethical will, and the impact on us was powerful. So I totally believe in the importance of doing that. And
Thank you so much for sharing that. And did you, were they alive when you received the letter?
oh yeah, they were sitting there with us, which it was powerful.
Wow. Thank you
So-
very much for sharing that. Yeah, that's. Thank you. And you know, I should say that I'm not here making the assumption that no one has ever done, that people haven't done anything like this or received anything like this. A lot of people have done something similar to this, never known what to call it or anything, but you know, have been inspired to be able to capture some of what's important to them in writing in a way that's going to be enduring. So I really appreciate you sharing that story, and I'm sure your parents were, you know, delighted that it meant as much as it did. Yeah. Yeah?
Something that I did 20 years ago was to interview my parents on Mother's Day and Father's Day over a period of 5 years. And my dad got Alzheimer's, so a lot of the stories would be lost. But I had an idea of what I wanted to talk about, and I could see both the limitations and the direction their lives had taken and why, which was valuable. Now, if you are my age or older, you may want to do that for to tell the stories on tape or video. These were on DVDs, and now DVDs are not what they once were, but I still can play them. And so, you know, you can offer that as a legacy.
Yep, it's all part of the same. There's no one way to do this in terms of capturing what it is that what kind of a record you would love to be able to have created. So that's wonderful. And so are you going to do that for yourself in terms of?
I'm going to write 5 letters.
Okay.
I've got 3 grandchildren and 2
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah, okay, great. I put you on the spot there. Anyone else have any questions or any trepidations with what I said? Or anyone want to share about any voices that they're hearing in their own heads? Okay, well, let's wrap this up. And you've been a great audience. Thank you very much. Okay.
I just want to, my name is Andrew Worthington. I'm the chair of the board for the Hartford Foundation. And I'm in a very unique position listening to this because I heard Susan, I think it was 9 years ago or so, she came and spoke in front of this group, in front of the foundation as well. And I was not on the board at the time. And here's a little bit of an ethical will. You write it on any piece of paper. You put it on a napkin. You can start the process anytime. It's never happened to do this. But sitting here 9 years later, I look at it and things have changed. You know, things have changed for me personally. You know, sitting, you know, and I look at it as board chair, and I think want to thank you for all joining us today and thinking about this topic and listening to the topic, because I think it is important, one, for the foundation's next 100 years, because this is part of what made us what we are today. I think of it today as, and I'm writing my notes down here, as a financial advisor. This conversation really starts and is part of our process of any advisor. So sit down with them, because the more people you tell, it allows us to continue your legacy on to those children, to those multiple generations, because we can be that passer of knowledge, you know, as any advisor. So do pass that on. It's not just for your children as well, and whoever you may be passing on to. I'm a trustee. I wasn't a trustee 9 years ago, but I am for my best friend's family in other states. So I ask him these questions. And so I get to understand what is his intentions. And I put him through the process. And he is one of these, you know. So it is a little bit of work and maybe a little bottle of wine or two to get him going. And that's how we kind of get through this. And the last part about it is, I'm a member, okay? I'm a member of the 1925 Society, as probably some of you are. You know, that's why you're here. And that process for me to become a member, my wife to become a member, and be part of this, was a thought process of doing our own ethical well. My daughters are 25 and 27, and we sit down and we talk about this. We talk about what the intentions are and what we want to do and why we're doing what we're doing. And you know, they listen to it now, but they're listening to it in nanoseconds, and they don't really understand it. But it's a continual process. And it's not just talking about it, but it's actions. You know, it's what my intentions are. So this process is something that's dynamic, and it will always be. It is not a static item. It is a continuum that will go on for your lifetime. And whether you're not interviewed today, you may be interviewed later. And you know, in writing your letters, you continue to write them. And keep an eraser around, because you may change it. And the best part about it is to just start the conversation. The foundation is here in the room. They're here available for you today, in the future, and we'll be here for another 100 years. So when that intention comes up and you want to have that conversation, just start it. Just start it. Get a piece of paper. Doesn't matter what it is. Get a napkin. And you had some of the words put down, and that's the way to start. So I want to thank everyone for coming here today and listening to this presentation. Susan, you did a great job.
Thank you.
Very consistent from 9 years ago, I will say that, but just different things that are in my head now from 9 years later. And enjoy the rest of the day. And just a side note, this weekend, Rose Weekend, right here in this park, okay? So 100 yards down the road, right down here, and Brad, who lives really right across the street, kind of clued me into that. But if you haven't seen the Rose Garden, it is in bloom, ready to go. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
That was great.
Thank you.